You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult to...
Before sunrise, one of the most trusted positions inside Prince William's household was suddenly empty. No farewell ceremony, no carefully managed palace announcement. The head of household had resigned overnight, and that morning a letter connected to that departure was filed in court. What disturbed those who read it was not simply that a senior aide had walked away. It was what the letter suggested had happened behind closed doors before he left. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William received the resignation shortly after 6 in the morning and read the first page twice without speaking. The prince knew immediately this was not an ordinary departure. The head of household, the senior official who coordinates access, schedules, sensitive correspondence, and the boundary between royal duty and private family life, did not simply hand in notice. He surrendered his palace credentials, removed himself from every chain of command, and left behind a signed account that was filed with the court that morning. William placed the pages flat on the desk, removed his glasses, folded them beside the letter, and asked everyone except Catherine to leave. The room fell still. Catherine stayed where she was, watching restraint settle over her husband with frightening familiarity. She understood that anger would have been easier. Anger could be answered. This silence could not. The princess saw him return to one paragraph repeatedly, and when she asked what the former official had written, William did not answer. The letter said he could no longer remain in a role where he was expected to accept instructions that crossed the line between service and personal accountability. He believed loyalty was being used to demand obedience for something he could not defend. What followed was worse. The former aide referred to an evening meeting held 3 nights earlier and described a request to change the handling of a sensitive household record. He did not identify who issued that request. He did not explain what the record contained. But the absence of a name sharpened the danger, because William's expression changed the moment he reached that line. Catherine saw it. He was not confused. He was remembering. William lowered the document and finally looked at her. This did not begin last night. The future king's words landed with the force of an admission, because they suggested he already knew which meeting had pushed his trusted official toward the door. And to understand why those 6 words changed everything, the people trapped inside this rupture must be understood as people with something personal to lose. A resignation can look administrative from the outside. Inside a royal household, it can become deeply personal. William had lost more than a senior employee. He had lost the person entrusted with controlling who reached him, what crossed his desk, and which problems were stopped before entering his family life. Catherine understood that immediately. So did King Charles. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, the man who had resigned was preparing to explain why loyalty had finally become impossible. Catherine found William standing beside the breakfast table with a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. The prince had already read the letter again, but the second reading had done nothing to calm him. Sir Jonathan Hale had served beside him for 6 years, earning access few outsiders ever received. As head of household, he had managed the senior machinery around William's working and private life, coordinating staff access, schedules, confidential communications, and the fragile border between official responsibility and family privacy. Hale had not merely known where the prince would be. He had often known what pressure was waiting before William entered the room. William could not understand why the man had walked away without giving him one final conversation. Loyalty mattered deeply to him, partly because royal life made genuine trust difficult. Catherine understood the other side. She knew Hale had helped protect stability around their children, keeping unnecessary tension away from the family whenever possible. The princess also knew that someone in his position could not simply obey every instruction. If a command carried legal risk, remaining silent could eventually place the entire household in danger. That was why the resignation frightened her almost as much as it angered her husband. Hale felt betrayed too. In the documented account attached to his court filing, he described several warnings raised during the previous month and stated that each had been treated as manageable rather than urgent. He believed the final instruction forced a choice between protecting his career and protecting the integrity of the office. William saw abandonment. The former courtier saw a line he could no longer cross. Neither man believed he had betrayed the other, which made the fracture even more painful. Charles received a private briefing later that morning, and one sentence stopped him cold. The filing referred to senior intervention outside the prince's immediate household. The king asked for the phrase to be repeated. He knew exactly why it mattered. If someone beyond William's own staff had influenced a sensitive instruction, the resignation could reach into another royal office entirely. Catherine finally asked the question William had been avoiding. Could the letter involve someone close to his father? He looked at her but gave no answer. The silence told her enough. She then asked whether Hale was frightened or angry. William stared at the cooling coffee and answered quietly, "Both, and that is the problem." The resignation may have happened overnight, but the relationship had not collapsed slowly. 3 evenings earlier, one precise confrontation had broken it. And once that meeting is understood, Hale's decision to leave no longer looks sudden at all. 3 nights before the resignation, the household still appeared intact. William completed his engagements. Catherine returned home, expecting an ordinary private evening. Sir Jonathan Hale remained at his desk later than usual. Then an instruction arrived concerning a restricted household record connected to a private meeting between William and the king. Hale was told the entry should be reclassified before the following morning. He refused. What happened next transformed disagreement into rupture. Hale understood exactly why the instruction mattered. Senior royal households maintain internal logs recording official meetings, approved visitors, and certain movements, creating a controlled record of who had access and when. Those records are not ceremonial paperwork. They can later establish responsibility, timing, and authority if a decision is questioned. The former courtier had spent years protecting that boundary, especially when private family conversations risked being confused with official business. To him, accuracy was not bureaucracy. It was protection. William learned about the refusal that evening and reacted with immediate anger. The prince had already been under pressure, and hearing that a senior member of his own household had rejected an instruction carrying his office's authority, felt dangerously close to open defiance. Catherine noticed the change in him before he explained what had happened. She knew her husband valued loyalty, but she also understood that Hale had never been reckless. If he had refused something this directly, there had to be a reason. The confrontation came during a private Tuesday night meeting at Kensington Palace. Hale was instructed to remove the recorded attendance of an unnamed senior royal advisor from the log of William's recent meeting with Charles. The official listened, opened the record, then refused. He placed his pen horizontally across the page, closed the folder, and pushed it back across the table. "If this bears my name, it will contain the truth." William stared at him, stunned less by the words than by the certainty behind them. Hale insisted he was protecting the future king, not challenging him. William heard something harsher. If the courtier believed the instruction itself was dangerous, then he was also implying that the prince's office could no longer be trusted automatically. That possibility struck at the heart of William's authority. He dismissed the meeting, but the argument did not end there. Hale received another message before midnight ordering him to reconsider. Instead, according to the documented account later attached to his court filing, he began drafting his resignation. One detail kept troubling him. The wording of the original instruction did not sound like William. The timing did not fit either. By morning, disagreement had become suspicion. And when William finally confronted the man who had guarded his household for years, neither of them entered the room believing the other was telling the whole story. There were no aides in the room when William summoned Sir Jonathan Hale. No secretary took notes. No communications advisor stood nearby to soften what followed. The prince wanted one answer. Why had his most trusted household officer prepared a resignation instead of coming directly to him? Hale wanted a different answer. Who had used William's authority to issue an instruction that William now seemed not to recognize? For several brutal minutes, trust itself became the argument. William asked him to start at the beginning and leave nothing out. The former courtier explained that the disputed order had arrived through a senior administrative channel, normally treated as carrying the prince's approval. That mattered because such a channel exists. To turn a principal's decisions into instructions, staff are expected to follow without hesitation. Refusing something sent through it was therefore not a minor act of disagreement. It meant challenging what appeared to be William's authority itself. Hale knew the risk. He refused anyway. William's frustration broke through almost immediately. He accused the older man of assuming something corrupt had happened, before giving him the chance to explain. The prince had trusted Hale with access to his office, his family schedule, and problems most employees never even knew existed. To discover that the man had chosen resignation before conversation felt brutally personal. Hale absorbed the accusation in silence, then answered that loyalty was exactly why he had refused. If an instruction was being issued in William's name without William's knowledge, obedience would not protect the future king. It would expose him. Hale then produced the detail that changed everything. According to the documented account later included with his court material, the disputed instruction carried a timestamp from a period when William had been alone with Catherine and had issued no office directions at all. The princess had been with him throughout that window. William knew it. Hale knew it. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether the courtier had defied his employer. It was whether someone else had borrowed the prince's authority and expected no one to challenge it. William stood so quickly that his chair moved backward. Anger disappeared from his face, replaced by something colder. "Are you telling me someone spoke in my name?" Hale did not soften the answer. He said the instruction had arrived exactly as though William had approved it, but the timing made that impossible. Then he identified the office from which the communication had originated. William stopped arguing. The future king asked for the king to be informed immediately. That question moved the crisis beyond a resignation. It now reached toward the machinery surrounding the heir himself, and toward the handful of people powerful enough to make an instruction look royal, even when it was not. Royal power does not always arrive with a crown or a signature. Sometimes it arrives through access. A telephone call answered without hesitation. A message transmitted through the correct office. A sentence beginning with, "The prince wants." When William discovered that his authority may have been used while he knew nothing about it, the resignation ceased to look like disloyalty. It began to look like a warning from someone who had seen a dangerous line crossed. William understood the danger, because senior household officials do more than pass messages. They act as gatekeepers, translating a principal's decisions into instructions that others are expected to trust. That system depends on confidence inside the chain. If someone can imitate authority from within it, even a false command can move quickly before anyone questions where it came from. The prince knew what that meant for him personally. Admitting his name had been used improperly meant admitting that the controls around his own household were weaker than he had believed. Charles received the briefing because the disputed record concerned a private meeting between father and son. The king read Hale's documented account alone, slowing when the former courtier described pressure arriving from outside William's immediate office. He had seen rivalry inside royal structures before, but this felt different. If internal competition had reached the point where someone could issue instructions through his son's channels, then the problem was no longer administrative. It had become a question of who could manipulate the future king's authority without being seen. William felt humiliation cutting deeper than anger. The message had been traced to an account accessible by 2 senior staff members, yet both denied sending it. That left him trapped between possibilities, each worse than the last. Either one of his trusted officials was lying, or another person had gained access through credentials that should have been secure. Hale's refusal now appeared less like rebellion and more like the one interruption that prevented the instruction from passing quietly into the record. Charles reached the final paragraph of the court letter and stopped. Hale had written that remaining silent could expose the prince, his family, and the crown itself to consequences later. The monarch lowered the pages onto the table and said nothing. William waited, then asked whether he should continue. His father looked directly at him. "No. Show me the original." The original household log changed the temperature of the room. One entry visible in the first version was absent from the later copy. Someone had not merely tried to influence how the record would be handled. Something had already been changed, and by the end of that day, the consequences were no longer contained inside one letter or one resignation. They were spreading through William's household, forcing everyone around him to confront the possibility that the warning had arrived too late. By afternoon, access was being restricted. Internal passwords were reset. Senior staff were called into separate meetings and told not to discuss the disputed record. The atmosphere around William changed instantly, because everyone now understood the same terrifying fact. Someone had tried to modify how a private royal meeting would be remembered on paper. Sir Jonathan Hale was already gone. Yet the warning contained in his resignation was now controlling every decision made inside the building. William ordered an immediate review of everyone who could reach sensitive household records. The prince knew those files mattered because they did more than track meetings. They could establish who was present when important decisions were discussed and who later had the authority to act on them. Hale's responsibilities were divided among several trusted staff members. But the change only reminded William how much institutional memory had disappeared with him. The future king had lost the one man who understood both the official system and its hidden weak points at exactly the moment he needed that knowledge most. Catherine drew her own line. The princess insisted that the children's private schedules be removed entirely from the review, making clear that no dispute inside the office would be allowed to spread into family life. William agreed, but she quickly realized he had not told her everything. For 3 days he had known the problem was more serious than a disagreement with Hale. He had tried to contain it alone. That decision wounded her because stability depended on trust between them, as much as it depended on secure records around them. Catherine listened as he finally explained what the comparison had uncovered. The original log contained a visitor entry that vanished from the later digital version. Hale had refused to remove it himself, yet someone had done exactly that after the confrontation. William then gave her the missing name, Marcus Bell, a senior advisor who had no approved reason to be present during the private discussion between father and son. She closed the nursery schedule she had been holding and looked directly at him. "You should have told me before it reached a courtroom." Bell denied changing anything when questioned. The advisor insisted he had not altered the log and claimed his presence at the meeting had been misunderstood. William heard the denial, but it no longer satisfied him. Access records and timestamps could explain how something happened. They could not explain motive. William finally accepted that internal interviews would never answer the most dangerous question. He needed the judgment of the man who had walked away. The review could identify access. It could trace every click. But only Hale could tell him what he believed was really happening, and whether someone had been manipulating the household, or whether William himself had become the target. Their final conversation did not happen across a grand conference table. William and Sir Jonathan Hale met privately, without secretaries, lawyers, or senior courtiers between them. For the first time since the resignation, neither man was required to defend a position for anyone else. The anger had cooled. What remained was disappointment, fear, and one devastating question. Had Hale abandoned the prince when he was most needed, or sacrificed his career to force William to see what was happening around him? William asked the question that had been troubling him from the beginning. Why file the letter with the court at all? Why not resign quietly and spare the household the public damage? The prince understood that a court filing, a document formally submitted as part of a legal process, could become far harder to contain than an internal resignation. Hale answered without hesitation. Once the record had been altered after his refusal, leaving silently would have created a dangerous possibility. If anyone later asked who had approved the change, responsibility could fall on the man whose name still sat closest to the process. Hale told him loyalty could not mean accepting blame for something he believed was wrong. His voice weakened as he admitted that he had expected the resignation to end his royal career permanently. William heard the cost in that admission. He confessed that the departure had felt like betrayal because the former courtier had been one of the few advisors he trusted without qualification. Hale replied that this trust was precisely why he had acted. He would rather lose his position than allow the future king to inherit responsibility for an instruction he may never have given. Then Hale produced the detail William had feared existed. According to transmission data he had preserved before surrendering access, Marcus Bell's credentials had been used during the alteration. The information did not prove motive, but it established a direct digital connection to the account that changed the record. William did not defend Bell. Instead, he admitted something harder. Months earlier, the advisor had been granted unusually broad access after another senior office requested greater administrative cooperation. William had approved it. That meant the weakness had entered his household through a decision carrying his own authority. William understood what had to happen next. He would not contest Hale's documented account in court. Bell's access would be removed, and the administrative failure would be acknowledged rather than hidden behind palace language. The decision cost him pride, but it restored something more important. William extended his hand. Hale hesitated, then finally accepted it. "You should not have had to resign to make me listen," the prince said. That admission changed the crisis. The palace would no longer fight the letter. And once the public learned that William had chosen accountability over denial, the scandal outside the gates took on an entirely different meaning. The story broke across Britain before breakfast. This time there was no vague palace mystery for newspapers to speculate around. A senior royal official had resigned. A court-filed letter described an instruction he refused to carry out, and William's household had now acknowledged that an internal record was altered without proper authority. Yet the public reaction did not unfold as the palace feared. Anger came first. Then something more complicated appeared. Sympathy for the man who resigned, and unexpected respect for the prince who stopped fighting him. William approved a short palace statement confirming the administrative review, Hale's departure, and the removal of Marcus Bell's access, while disciplinary action continued. The prince also allowed one crucial sentence, accepting responsibility for failures of oversight. That wording mattered, because oversight meant the duty to make sure people using royal authority were properly controlled. He did not admit ordering the alteration. He admitted that the system around him had failed. For a future king, that distinction was painful but powerful. Catherine watched the coverage beside him and worried about something harder to correct than an internal record: public memory. The princess knew headlines often survived longer than explanations. Even if the evidence pointed away from her husband, one phrase linking William to an altered royal record could follow him for years. He listened without interrupting. Then a broadcaster revealed that the prince had declined to challenge Hale's court letter. The former official was no longer being framed simply as a disgruntled employee. He had become the man whose refusal exposed a weakness inside the household. Hale watched the same coverage from home. Relief came first, because William had not attacked his credibility. Grief followed. Years of royal service had been compressed into one resignation, one letter, and one sentence repeated across television. The official who refused. The former courtier understood that his decision would now define him publicly. But he also knew the central warning had finally been heard. Britain found its image of the scandal that morning. The fictional chronicle appeared on newsstands beneath the headline, "He quit rather than change the record," alongside an image of William arriving at an engagement alone. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. When the prince's car passed, scattered applause began, then grew. It was not celebration. It sounded more like recognition. William reached for the remote when the presenter called Hale, the official who refused. Catherine watched his hand stop. He lowered it and let the report continue. The country had delivered its judgment on the resignation. William still had to deliver his own, and the way he handled Marcus Bell would decide whether this crisis ended as humiliation or became something far more important. The scandal did not end when the court letter became public. It ended when William decided what mattered more, preserving the illusion that his household had never failed, or proving that failure would have consequences even when acknowledging it was painful. Marcus Bell's access was permanently revoked. Sir Jonathan Hale's account was formally accepted. The altered record was restored. And inside the royal household, a resignation once viewed as betrayal came to be understood as an act of loyalty expressed in its most uncomfortable form. William signed off on the final decision, knowing there was no painless version of it. Bell was removed permanently after the review concluded that his privileged credentials had been used to alter the record without the prince's authorization. The future king also approved new controls, requiring 2 senior officials to independently authorize any future change to sensitive household logs. Those logs mattered because they could establish who attended important meetings and who later acted on information discussed there. The original missing entry was restored. Nothing would be quietly erased again. William also accepted something harder than administrative failure. His greatest mistake had not been giving the disputed instruction. He had not. His mistake had been allowing a system to develop in which someone could issue an instruction in his name and reasonably expect others to obey. Catherine saw the weight of that admission immediately. The princess had watched her husband move from anger to humiliation and finally to resolve. Now she saw something else, a man less interested in unquestioned loyalty and more determined to keep people around him who were capable of saying no. Charles spoke privately with his son once the review was complete. The king did not offer comfort through denial. He told William that protecting the crown sometimes meant allowing an uncomfortable truth to remain visible, because burying failure only made it more dangerous later. The monarch understood that the crown, the institution of monarchy, rather than simply the person wearing the crown, survives through trust as much as tradition. His son listened. This time he did not defend himself. Hale never returned to his former position. William respected that decision because repairing trust did not require pretending nothing had happened. In their final exchange, the prince sent him a brief, handwritten acknowledgement, thanking him for protecting the integrity of the office, even at personal cost. Hale read it alone, folded it once, and placed it away without replying. The silence no longer felt like hostility. It felt like closure. The head of household had walked out overnight, and the letter he left behind shook the foundations of William's private world. But its deepest message was not about scandal. It was about the monarchy he would one day inherit, one where loyalty could no longer mean silence. Authority could not survive without accountability, and protecting the crown sometimes required someone brave enough to say no, and a future king strong enough to admit that person had been right. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.